Congressman McCotter, same thing. Do you think that we should just freeze the foreclosures for the next 60 days, 90 days?
Well, sure. I think at the present time you're seeing a de facto freeze, where you have the attorney generals across all 50 states looking into it. You have even Bank of America talked about a moratorium. And I would agree with my colleague in this respect, that it was the banks that were going through the process, trying to make as much as they could off of people who probably should not have been given a loan in the first place. And so at this point in time, you have to find out what the banks did, how it's affecting the people in those homes now, how it can be avoided in the future. And as someone who comes from Michigan, where we have high foreclosures, not simply because people do not want to pay, but because right now it's a struggling economy, it would seem to me prudent to let the attorney generals handle it and have Congress waiting to see if there's anything we need to do if the attorney generals are not able to help do this.
Well, let me ask you this then, Congressman Garamendi. I mean, even David Axelrod on Sunday, came out and said, not so fast about a foreclosure freeze because of the weak housing market, which again, is so weak in the state of California. But it's not just, this isn't just going to affect those that went through the foreclosure process, maybe unfairly lost their home. It's also going to affect pension funds. They have mortgage-backed securities. They have mortgages, public funds, pension funds, private pension funds. So can we consider here the ill effects of a freeze and what that would do?
Well, of course, the ill effects have been known for some time now. We started out with a serious problem that was created by Wall Street with the subprime mortgage fiasco. And now here we are once again with another fiasco because the banks didn't do it right. Now, they should be smarter. They certainly have enough lawyers. They certainly have enough money. Their profits are higher than ever. And they got it wrong yet again. It's about time for them to get it right. And in fact, with the Wall Street Reform Act, we actually put in serious restraints on what happened in the subprime mortgage market, and those restraints are now the law. They're going to have to follow it going forward. But now we're talking about cleaning up the mess of the past.
But Congressman Garamendi, let's go back to this issue just for a second here, because what you're saying is that obviously the banks have tons of money and everything is wonderful, and we should be having the banks pay for it. But the banks are the ones that in particular J.P. Morgan Chase, that jumped out ahead of this and said we're going to stop foreclosures. It was David Axelrod, the administration, that came out on Sunday and said, oh, wait a minute, so fast. So why should the banks, the banks are already doing the work. The administrations are the one that's saying, hey, any investigation by Congress that's going to cost taxpayer money, anything else that you all decide to do in Congress, like regulate the foreclosure process even more so, is going to cost taxpayer money. Maybe we need to step back here, Congressman Garamendi.
Hold on a second. We know that Wall Street melted down largely because of the subprime mortgage situation and all of the collateralized loans that were put together. The Wall Street Reform Act, which passed without one Republican support in the House, actually reforms and sets in new laws and sets up a consumer protection agency. That's now the law of the land. Since that passed, we now know that the banks screwed up yet again. They screwed up in the processing of the foreclosures. That's not the government's responsibility. They simply didn't honor the contracts that they wrote themselves. Now they've got to square it away.
But if we do a national freeze,
we're not talking about a moratorium.
But if we do a national freeze, and I understand California's point, I understand more than 21% of foreclosures are in the state of California. I get that. But at the same time, if we start this investigation process, if we do a national freeze for 60 days, 90 days, that is going to be more spending by the U.S. government. And the polling shows us it's true. And the polling shows us that Americans are worried about spending.
Well, of course they're worried about spending, but they're worried about spending money on what? Like an unnecessary war in Iraq? $1 trillion plus? Yes, they're worried about spending. But we need to look at what it is crucial. In fact, it is constitutional. A lot of people talk about the Constitution. For the Congress to investigate, it's crucial that we do so. Nobody's talking about a national freeze at this point. What we're talking about is the banks getting it right. A freeze has been imposed by the banks themselves. That's good, because they know that they are at serious risk if they continue to do things contrary to their own contracts. Those are contract negotiations or contract situations. They could be sued left, right, and center, and undoubtedly will be. So they decided to put the freeze on. I don't think anybody in Congress, nobody's there right now. We're all out campaigning for the election. Nobody is back there saying there ought to be a freeze.
Actually,
that there surely ought to be an investigation.
Congressman, with all due respect, Congressman Cummings, your colleagues in this, and are saying this, Congresswoman Giffords from Arizona, Debbie Wasserman, all of of them are saying that they are looking for a national freeze. They're looking for 60 days or
Well,
90 days. But and y'all can debate that in Congress, obviously, when you get back together. I can understand. I do want to bring in Congressman McCotter. I'm so sorry. I do want to bring you in. We just had some news crossing, and our viewers saw that actually the governor of Michigan is looking for a freeze on foreclosures. You have state attorney generals, Congressman McCotter, across the country looking for this freeze. So can you respond to your governor's news just crossing here, sir?
Well, again, Cheryl, I think that the key right now is that we have a federal system, we have state attorney generals looking at it, the governor may be making a partisan remark, who knows. I think that the Congress should have the potential for this in reserve. And of the issue of having investigation and oversight, I don't think anyone in the public would think it is a waste of their money to have Congress actually doing its job to oversee these banks and others who've gone through what they themselves admit have been mistakes in letting these foreclosure or these mortgages out and now facing foreclosure. So to me, it would be prudent to allow the states to do their job. It would be prudent to allow the Congress to do its investigation and oversight. And the issue of a federal moratorium is something that could be discussed later. And also at this point in time, I continue to stress, you have real action on this coming from not only the 50 states themselves, but from the banks themselves. So the issue of whether we should have a national moratorium because Congress said so kind of misses the point that it's happening despite Congress not being in session right now.
And to be fair, again, these are some of your colleagues in Congress that are making these statements. As Congressman Garamendi rightly points out, as they're on the campaign trail, and that could be part of it here. I do want to bring in Mark DeCambry from the New York Post. He's with me here on set, gentlemen, and he covers the banks in particular. And I want to go back to Congressman Garamendi's point about that the banks can afford this, that they should take the lead here, that they should be made to suffer possibly if there was wrongdoing.
And they will suffer. And I think even yesterday when you listened to the earnings call from JP Morgan, you heard Jamie Dimon say, we're probably going to have to pay pretty significant fines here. Mm-hmm. He called it incremental because they spent so much money, and the mortgage business is a losing business for them at this point. But I don't want to point fingers here, but clearly the banks in the process of securitization over the past 5 years, the rapid cycle of taking in mortgages and securitizing them, sometimes the title and deeds in those documents have been misplaced and improperly done, and that falls at the feet of the banks. And the only reason why, and one reason one could say that they're stopping or they're supporting this notion of a freeze now is because they're kind of overwhelmed with foreclosures anyway. So it's not like they're doing anyone any favors.
Right. Well, and Congressman Garamendi, I saw a headline today, the Burger King kids, they're calling these maybe 23-year-olds that were working in the back offices of the banks and handling the foreclosure process. So obviously this is all over the headlines, Congressman Garamendi. At the same time, what do you think the folks of California want to hear? What do you think they want? Do they want the process stopped, or do they maybe want something else? Tell me.
Well, I think you're really talking about those that are in jeopardy here. And, of course, they want it stopped because it's the right thing to do. They had a contract. The contracts have not been honored. And they have a legal or a contractual position to say, wait a minute, you can't do this to me without the proper proceedings. So certainly those that are in the foreclosure process or who could come into that situation, they want it stopped. Beyond that, there's a very real issue here that we need to deal with, and that's we need to get this done right. We've got a huge mess that was created for a variety of reasons, most of which I've already talked about here. It needs to be straightened out. Congress needs to continue to do its oversight. Whether there should be a freeze or not, that's to be determined in the future. I agree with my colleague from Michigan that it's in the process at the state level and in the private sector, all to the good. But beyond that, what Californians want are jobs. Yeah, they want to get this economy moving. They want to get the jobs, and they want to be able to pay their mortgages because they're employed.
Understood. Congressman Cotter, last word to you, sir.
Well, no, I agree with my colleague on the prudence course that we should take, and I also point out that you want to have clear title to these homes, even in the tragic case where people cannot make their payments and are foreclosed on with due process and within the rule of law. The next purchaser who will come along to help revitalize that housing market is going to want a clear title. If you do not have clear title, you're not going to have people buying those homes.
Congressman Thaddeus McCotter from Michigan, and of course California